Carl Zha. That's CarlZha, or for you if you're an American like me, at CarlZha. He is the host of Silk and Steel podcast, a regular guest on RT, CGTN, and other media platforms as well. It's great to talk with you today, man.
Always good to see you
So,
again, Jason.
I guess the big thing is I want to switch to economics, which is really why I have you on the show. You're really good at global economics. So, in your assessment right now, well, this isn't just economics, but the U.S. global dominance seems to be receding. There was a report that came out yesterday or the day before that showed that people in Southeast Asia are largely saying they would choose China. And that is different from a couple of years ago. So, you're in Southeast Asia. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think for one thing, the gravitational pull of the Chinese economy is very felt very strongly here. For example, here I'm talking with you on the internet that was built by Huawei. Huawei built the 4G network here in Indonesia. The electricity that powers this conversation is provided by Chinese-built power plants north of Bali. And I can go on my phone, my Xiaomi phone, which we're recording this conversation on. Chinese made smartphone made basically made smartphone affordable to a lot of people in the global south, including Indonesia. Like our nanny has a smartphone; she has a Vivo, I think. And so this is whereas if you just compare simply the level of investment, the U.S. versus China in Southeast Asia, the Chinese investment in South Asia absolutely dwarfs the U.S. investment into the region. The one of the other big project that China completed recently in Indonesia is the Jakarta Bandung High Speed Railway. I believe you're from California, yes, Jason?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah, so we know the story with the California High Speed Rail, which
Mhm.
which started planning in the early 2000s.
I
And
heard about it.
go
This is
ahead.
interesting to me. I heard about it in the 1990s. I had to write a high school report on it in my senior year. There's find some project and write a report on it. So I found that. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I presented to everyone like it was going to be there in a few years. And then I posted that on X, and someone said when their father was doing radio in the 1960s, they were already talking about it. So here it is, like 60 years later, and it's barely even started. But I mean, in that same time, and from 2008 to now, what is it, 45,000 kilometers of high speed rail? And that's just in China. And as you're pointing out, China is clearly building in Southeast Asia and other places as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is so like the choice is quite clear. You trade with China, you benefit from being integrated with a trade network with China, whereas U.S. presence in Southeast Asia now is primarily military. I mean, the pivot to Asia that started with Obama administration, they're not talking about pivot economically. They're not pivoting investment into Southeast Asia. They're pivoting military deployment and U.S. bases. So this is quite a sharp contrast
Hmm.
of the U.S. and Chinese approach to Southeast Asia. Another thing that bears to mention is, where I am in Indonesia, it's a majority Muslim country,
Hmm.
and so is Malaysia next door. And what U.S. is doing supporting Israel in the Middle East is not popular. It's not popular to say the least
Hmm.
in this part of the world.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, if I were a leader in a nation, I would want trade, economic development. Ultimately, even in the United States, they always say it's the economy, dummy, and they're talking about whether an elected leader is going to be able to maintain their place. So, if you're an elected leader in Southeast Asia, you're thinking the same thing. I need to grow my economy. What is going to grow my economy? More trade. And that is what China offers. Like you said in our previous interview, China is open for business. I get a lot of people who say, oh, why, if I was the leader of such and such country, I would just trade with China, not the United States. Or if I was the leader of China, I would not trade with the United States. And I think that's actually not China's strategy at all. China is going to trade with anyone, anyone who wants to buy and sell and trade goods. China is like, okay, we're here. So, I mean, I think that is one of the advantages of doing trade with China is that it is stable, that the relationship of continuing trade is a stable relationship. But I have other questions, lots of other questions. So, in your opinion, do other Americans largely seem to understand what is taking place? Because outside of the United States, it seems pretty clear. But in your assessment, I mean, we're both abroad, but you were back recently. Do you think other U.S. Americans are like, oh, this is not going so well, or are they like, yay, good times?
Well, I mean, let's be real here. Most of the Americans can't even find Southeast Asia on a map. So, and most of them are just being led by the nose by the mainstream media reporting in US, and what the mainstream media reporting is China is being aggressive to its neighbors. The US have to commit its territory to guarantee a free and open Indo-Pacific, right? I mean, that's the mainstream media right now. But the reality, of course, is different on the ground. I wanted to add also the Chinese investment in the region is also a different in a different way from, say, for example, U.S. investment, because there are U.S. investment in Indonesia, but they're mostly focused in the mining sector, like uh,
Mm,
Fremont. They're focused on mining in West Papua and or oil and gas exploration offshore. But China is investing in all arenas, and they're not just interested in natural resource extraction. China is helping to build a nickel factory in Indonesia. So Indonesia is one of the major nickel producing region in the world. So the Indonesian nickel no longer needs to be loaded on ships as raw
mm.
commodity to be processed in other parts of the world. Now Indonesia can process their own nickel themselves, which provided the added value. So this is something that China is help with the region that U.S. firms are not.
That's a really interesting point because I've read that in a few books about how IMF and World Bank failed to develop the underdeveloped world and how this is just replicating models of colonialism. And one of the things that, for people who haven't studied colonialism, one of the things the Europeans and the Americans did is they went in and then they would extract, resources from those countries, bring them back to their own country where they had factories, develop them into finished goods, and then ship them back and sell them to those people for considerable value. But the kind of infrastructure that China is building around the world, not just in Indonesia but in other places, is allowing local factory growth. And a lot of the energy projects that China is doing in Africa and in Southeast Asia, Laos, Vietnam, is allowing factory growth to begin to really develop and to flourish. In 2000, the year 2000, Laos had 40% electrification. By 2020, it had 100% electrification. That doesn't just allow people to have refrigerator and TVs, but it also allows them to open factories and to process using local, resources to make finished goods and export those for, as you just pointed out, added value. Gina Raimondo, the spokesperson for Huawei, she recently said, sorry, the Commerce Secretary for the U.S., she recently said the U.S. will, quote, do anything to ensure China can't catch up or compete with the U.S. in advanced technology. In your assessment, is that working?
How can you keep 1/5 of humanity down? One in every five person in the world lives in China, and what they're saying is, no, we will not allow you to progress technologically. You want to roll back of your progress. This is really foolhardy. As you mentioned earlier, China is not China is focused on its own internal growth. They're not doing this to compete with Americans. They're doing this to make the life better for average Chinese citizens. It's the U.S. that's forcing countries in the world to choose. Most of the countries in the region, particularly Southeast Asia, they don't want to have to choose between China and United States. They're perfectly fine to trade with both, because the idea is you can never have too many friends, and you don't want to make any enemies. To be friends of all and to be enemy of none, and that's a very sensible policy. But U.S. got this bug of us, have to maintain the U.S. supremacy over the world at no matter the cost. That's forcing people to choose. You're either with me or against me. It's my way or the highway, and that doesn't play well in today's world. We're not no longer live in the post Cold War, the U.S. hyperpower unipolar moment anymore. We're living a multipolar world. People have more choice. One of the things with rise of China is giving people choices, is giving people alternatives, so they don't always have to rely on IMF and World Bank loans. Now there's China offering loans, so people can pick and choose. And what US want to do is taking that option away from people. I mean that's it's the choice is quite simple. This is why many people would rather side with China in this approach. They're not necessarily siding with China; they're siding with their own own best interest. And sorry, what was it? Did I answer your
Well, I was
question?
going to ask a follow-up question. I think that would help
Yeah,
clarify.
yeah,
In
okay.
terms of Chinese technological advancements, do you think that China is still behind the curve of the United States? And a lot of people accuse China of copying U.S. technologies, or is China? How would you describe China's relationship to advanced technology right now?
Oh, right, right. Okay, so let's actually go back to your question about Gina Raimondo.
Mm,
That the chip sanction was specifically targeting Huawei by the broad range of Chinese tech sector. That was to we saw Huawei make their chip breakthrough just recently. It was quite a shock to many U.S. decision makers that China is now able to manufacture 7 nanometer chips. They
mm.
thought, okay, China will be lucky if they get to 14 nanometers, and no way they're going to make it 7 nanometers because US has already taken all the tool sets away. And to everyone's surprise, China is developing their own method, their own tool sets. And the Gina Raimondo approach is, because our sanction is working, is because our sanction is not broad enough. So we're going to expand
Right,
the
right.
sanctions. I mean, this is basically this reminds me what Joe Biden said about the U.S. bombing campaign in Yemen, and he said, "Well, is it U.S. bombing? Is the U.S. bombing helping to break the blockade of Red Sea? No. Are we going to stop doing it? No.
Working. Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
I mean, basically, that's U.S. approach right now. The sanctions not working, but they're going to do it anyway, and they further expand sanctions. Sanctions is counterproductive because prior to the U.S. tech sanction on China, China actually was dependent on
Mm,
chip import. China spent average about 400 billion US dollars on chip imports, which means China has spent more on chip import than they spend on importing oil. And that dependency was growing year after year as the Chinese economy itself was growing. So in fact, China's dependency on the U.S. tech sector was growing, and yet U.S. The bright genius from the U.S. Commerce Department and all the Pentagon and all the Washington big heads, they thought, oh ha, we saw this weakest link. Well, what, we're gonna snip this part of the supply chain. We're gonna force Chinese back to the Stone Ages. What has happened instead is it pointed out for China, what their vulnerability is in their supply chain,
mm.
and even though people has pointed out, oh, but Chinese government had spent decades trying to foster its own indigenous semiconductor industry, but has always lagged behind the West, many generations behind. So how would their latest effort, be any different? But the difference is the U.S. sanction. Before the U.S. sanction, firms like Huawei, they can easily go purchase Qualcomm chips. They can or they can go to TSMC on Taiwan to manufacture their own chips. But there's no reason. In other words, the Chinese commercial firms, they have no reason to work with the domestic Chinese chip manufacturers, especially when the domestic Chinese manufacturers are usually 3, 4, or 5 generations behind their Western counterparts. Because the private Chinese companies, their goal is to rush out a good product the Chinese consumer would buy. They don't care if the components will come from US, from Japan, from Korea, from Netherlands. They just want to get the best of its class, put it into their product, and then so to sell their product at a quality and a price that the consumer would purchase. But now the US sanction is to tell all the Chinese tech companies, like it's basically hanging a sword on the top of all Chinese tech companies. That you know what, we can cut you off at any time of this very vital part of your supply chain and force your companies to close. I mean, for a while, Huawei's phone business, handset business, almost got wiped out because of the chip sanctions. When I first came to in Bali, for example, you will see Huawei everywhere in store. But for a couple of years after the sanction, like all the Huawei phones just disappeared. There's still other Chinese brands who are not under sanction, like Vivo, Oppo, and Xiaomi. But Huawei phone was gone, and inside China, Apple basically cannibalized all the Huawei market share. And but that is a huge alarm bell to all other Chinese tech companies. Like, we can be the next Huawei if we grew to the point that will catch the attention of the U.S. State Department. And also for Huawei, they have no choice. They have to go domestic route. Now they have to work with SMIC, the domestic Chinese producer of semiconductors. So now it kind of, for the first time, the Chinese private industry and the Chinese government objective are perfectly in a line. This was forced upon by the U.S. sanctions. And now what we saw is that because it's such an existential issue for the Chinese tech industry, it's a do or die situation. And this is a kind of the situation that fosters innovation. And SMIC was able to pull it off by making the 7 nanometer chip for Huawei under heavy sanctions. Of course, obviously sanction is not working. Huawei has roared back with their new phone, and they took back all their market share from Apple in China. But Gina Raimondo method is, you know what? Okay, maybe there's a loophole in our sanctions. We got tighten it even more, and expand more sanctions against any suppliers to Huawei. Again, this is just gonna force China to work tighter, more tightly together with each other, making everybody to work faster, harder. China graduated 1.7 million engineers in 2023. Versus I think it was like 500,000 in US. So there's no competition. I mean, like China, in terms of tech nowadays, there's nothing you cannot solve by throwing a bunch of people and shit tons of money. I mean, and given time, things will happen. I mean, that's what China is doing right now. China has already ramped up the domestic semiconductor manufacturing, especially in the low and mid end. What people don't, people right now is focused on TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductors, which manufacture most of the world's advanced chip. But the vast majority of the chip market is still in the low to mid end chips. Because now we use chips in everything, in refrigerators, in cars, and now China is able to manufacture everything from low to medium range of the chips, up to all the way to 7 nanometer. The effect of the U.S. sanction is such that if Chinese company have a choice, now they will go domestic. because
Mhm.
they gotta have a guarantee that it won't be cut off. So what that means is this $400 billion chip market.
Mhm.
China is the world's largest market for
Consumer,
semiconductors.
yeah.
Yeah, so that means all this market that's if as, as
Yeah,
soon as it goes
Germany,
Chinese,
Sweden, Japan, United States, Taiwan province, all cut off from the largest importer of chips in the world by their own choice. And so now China will be completely self-reliant in the future. In 5 years, all of these companies will have redundant manufacturing because China is the largest exporter of electronic devices, like you mentioned, coffee machines and televisions and all these things that use these chips. And if they don't need to import them anymore, which is the United States is forcing them not to, it's just ridiculous. It really frustrates me that the
it's
In addition to the fact that the United States is ultimately hurting itself and its allies long term, another thing that really frustrates me is that the United States is throwing away goodwill. The deeper we have economic relations with China, the better the whole world is going to be moving forward. This is the most important economic and political relationship in the world. If we can have good relations, that's good for global peace. That's good for everyone. And so the United States is constantly like, what can we do to try to, screw over China? But then China is just like, okay, we'll just do that ourselves then. Like it really is just bizarre watching like Gina Raimondo and that kind of thinking, why are these people given the ability to do these things? Doesn't she have people around her warning her of the potential consequences? Because it seems pretty obvious to a lot of people.
that's the thing. I think there's a cutoff between the people who stuck in the beltway bubble and the people who actually work in the industry. Because right now, a lot of the tech companies are telling Washington, "Stop doing this. You're killing our future business." I mean, even like the tech firm that's on the top of the world right now, like Nvidia. Nvidia, their biggest market is in China.
Mm.
And US is telling Nvidia, no, you have to cut off your top AI chips to China. And they're all these US tech companies are saying, you're killing us. What the hell? You don't know what you're doing. And like I said, China is the world's largest market for semiconductors. Once China achieves self-sufficiency, once these the consumers of chips goes Chinese, they're not never coming back. They're not
Mm.
coming back to source their components from U.S. companies ever again because for the fear that they might get cut
Right.
off. And
Yeah.
as you mentioned, Chinese, like a lot of the high tech Chinese firm, like Huawei, for example, the CEO, founder and CEO of Huawei, Ren Zhengfei, he was a big lover of the United States. He was a big admirer of the United States. Same goes for the founder of ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, and. But U.S. government is forcing them with the reality, with the sanctions, like, oh yeah, you love us, but guess what? We have to screw you because we want to be number one. And this is completely misguided because there's no reason China and US cannot coexist and prosper together. But again, it's a kind of the mentality of Washington elite that somehow US have to be number one no matter what. Like they want to, even roll back the progress for 1/5 of humanity, and the fact it's a self-defeating policy, and it not just hurts Chinese, but it hurts American as well.
Mm. Yeah.
It hurts the bottom line of the American companies that's selling to China. Many ways GM sells more cars to China than they sell in United States. And the effectively U.S. sanction is that GM factories in China producing cars for the Chinese market, they cannot buy semiconductors from China to make cars they sell in China because of U.S. sanctions. This is completely ridiculous.
Mm. Well, I kind of wanted to go a little deeper into that. And one of the things that I've been noticing, I think this is becoming a trend for people to really point out, is yeah, the United States has historically, the last few decades from the 60s and 70s, had the largest consumer base in the world, the largest amount of people buying things. And so a lot of people were like, we need to access the American market because they have lots of people who are willing to buy our products. So if you're a business person in Europe, you're a business person in Asia, it doesn't matter. You want to get into the American market. And so that has been one of the reasons the US economy has been so strong for so long. But now it looks like, if you look at the statistics, you have 135 million middle class Americans, but you have 400 or 500 million, middle class Chinese consumers. And that's growing. As the GDP of China increases, disposable income by purchasing power parity, or however you want to measure it, is also increasing. So, in your assessment, down the line in 5 or 10 years, like, or even, next year, do you think that the United States and the companies in the United States may end up regretting damaging Sino-US relations, because ultimately China's going to have a consumer economy that's 3 or 4 times larger than that in the United States?
Well, I mean, U.S. companies are regretting right now. This is not their policy. They don't want to continue to do business with China. It's just big heads in Washington that decide to impose the sanctions. Most of the U.S. companies are against it, and the only ones who are not affected are the U.S. companies that do not have a business presence in China. Where I'm talking about Facebook and Google, and those companies are also online trying to kill off TikTok in US right now because TikTok is a major competitor. And so this, we have it- it's crazy what US government is trying to do. They're basically essentially trying to build a wall around US and also its ally, so-called ally, but really vassal states in Europe.
Mm,
And they're trying to divide the world into two blocks again.
mm,
Basically, they're bringing back the Cold War, and I think they're in their mind, their thinking is, okay, we know how Cold War One kind of played out. You have the Soviet bloc, and then you have the Western bloc, and we won Cold War 1.0, so we can do it again. But the time is different. I mean, China is a manufacturing center of the world. China is a factory of the world. When you're trying to cut off China, you're not just what you're really doing is you're cutting yourself off from the world, because China will continue to make goods not only for people in China but all over global South countries and all over the emerging economies. So we're already seeing the effect of that. We can look at the areas, for example, when U.S. applied sanctions against Huawei. U.S. is still struggling with 5G, and China is already moving ready to move on with 6G, and so so we're gonna what more likely, and also China is rolling out with their sustainable energy, and also
oh,
with
yeah. By the
and
way, in terms
yeah,
of 5G, this is a 5.5G portable hotspot that I could get from Huawei. So I already have 5.5 in China. I mean, this
yeah.
thing works like if I go to the Himalayas, I'll be standing on the mountain. I've got 5.5G. In the United States, they still have like 3G, 4G levels in some of the remote parts of the country. That is not the case here.
Yep,
But
yep.
yeah, in terms of the solar and wind, it's and all the green energy, it is so shocking how fast it's going. I mean, I have been a proponent of China's move towards green energy for many years, but I was surprised by 2023. It was shocking how much they actually rolled out, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's intermittent," but China has so many new tools, just amazing, like new technologies like gravity storage, like where they just move boulders up and down in these huge towers, and water up and down streams, and all kinds of stuff to maintain electrification all the time. In addition to the fact that there's still a mix of fossil fuels in with everything, and nuclear is going. I mean, China's economy, one of the main drivers in 2023 was rolling out all of these renewable energies, and China's technology is clearly, really advanced. China now has the highest high speed this fastest high-speed rail line in the world, and maglev is actually becoming a reality very soon, according to some friends of mine. So it's just amazing to see that the United States is like, oh, we'll just cut China off from this technology. What are you talking about? The United States is like a museum of 20th century artifacts. I mean, in many ways, China has already outpaced the United States in most important technologies. Yes, there are some, critical technologies the United States is ahead in, but if the United States just cuts China off, China will just make those anyways. So it's really bizarre to see this kind of strategy instead of, hey, China's the next big thing. Let's be buddies with them. That would, in my opinion, as an American, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, that's what the UK did. They were like, oh, wow, the United States is the next big thing. We're buddies, you and me. Like that's what the United States should be doing with China, in my assessment.
Well, I think one of the problem is nowadays very few Americans they travel to China. Very few Americans speak Chinese. Very few American has ever set foot on China, and so their idea of China is not actually the country itself. Their idea of China is existing a bizarro world that's constructed by their media. And the point is that I have a feeling the elite in the Beltway they start to imbibe in their own propaganda. Their idea of the world is totally warped, and they probably don't even realize how far ahead China is at this point. They still think Washington can push its weight around.